The day I learned I was a demon was the worst day of my life. I won't lie. I spent most the day terrified of dying, or losing a limb. The first thing I heard, and thought about when I woke that morning, was of demons. A workat scream echoed for a beat, before an answering scream, higher in pitch, called in the distance. It sounded like the packs were fighting, a territorial dispute, most likely. There was a pride not too far from the temple. A muffled shriek drifted up through the floorboards, and I rolled my eyes when it happened on the next scream. I buried my head under the pillow, pulling my blanket up. New disciples thought the world was ending every time a demon passed nearby. It took them long to understand. If the wall was breached, the klaxon went off to warn us. I rolled out of bed, tripped over the mountains of fabric and crushed cans that littered the floor of my room, and head-butted the wardrobe door. It bounced back. Clothes flung over the top and spilling out the bottom had stopped it from clicking shut. I was not a dirty person, but a messy one. I was the kind of person who could make mess in an empty 4x10 box. Stood in my fraying bra and panties, I groggily scratched at my knee, trying to pull myself together. It took a lot of rummaging around before I pulled on my ragged jeans and faded t-shirt, some pre-rupture band on the front. Not the best gear for running, but I was going to have to go straight to class afterwards. I put my boots on and headed outside. It was dark. Dawn was hours away, and the grounds were eerily quiet. Fire drums set alongside the pathway flickered, and weak flames cast a sick flush over the cold ground. Electricity was hard to generate, so the sect cut corners where it could. Resources during the day, and after dark, focused on wall hotspots, places difficult for the clerics to easily defend, like steep ravines and cliff faces. These were the places demons too often breached. My eyes skipped over the temple grounds, and every graffiti wall, battered trash can was colored fondly in my mind's eye. The temple was an army base before the rupture, but now it was the stomping ground of the sect clerics and their disciples. It was home. Safety. My eyes settled on the wall in the near distance, peeking out from the forest bordering the region. Past that electric fence was outside. Past that fence roamed the demons. I started at a jog. In no time I was at the main gate, whistling to the security guard who barely looked up from his book. I wondered where he'd gotten that. Books made purely for entertainment were as rare as plain paper. The sect had a library, of course, right here at Temple, but you had to have serious pull with the priests to be able to rent one. We lucky disciples got to feel the smooth pages of a book on a regular basis, even if they were educational, and my envy was brief. The guard caught me eyeing up the pages and placed it on his lap. He waved me on as the gate cracked to let me out. Leaving Temple, I was soon on a wide and flat lane gravitating toward the forest. I reached the wall and stared at it. Each time I came here, I asked myself the same question: was defying sect doctrine and stepping past this point worth it? The excited thump of my heart told me the answer. I glanced behind to scan the roadside and check I was not in sight. Confident I was alone, I slid through the sliver of space between the charged wires, then held my breath for a beat. There was nothing but silence. I had no idea how I'd done it, but one morning I was tired of plodding the same ground, and I'd looked out into the forest with its thick tree trunks, jutting roots, and seen a thrilling new route to push myself harder and faster. I had stood and stared at the webbing of steel, then wished for a hole to climb through. The wires had just unraveled without setting off the klaxon. I remembered thinking with a horrible kind of panic that I had somehow done witchcraft, and was convinced I was the blackest kind of evil. Then I realized how ridiculous I was being, and figured it was a coincidental gift from the universe, or something. Now every morning I had a new obstacle course to enjoy. The trees were tall, and the air was fresh and clean and free. I ran, racing the beat of my own footfalls. Cold wind whipped past, pushing hair into my face. Gods, how I loved to run and revel in the illusion of freedom it gave. I was the fastest disciple at the temple, and the best at cross-country. It took a lot to tire me out. I ran until the forest became too dense for me to sprint without tripping over roots. My chest rising and falling was a pleasant feeling I rarely got to experience, and only could experience when I ran outside. Pushing at the long and dark tangle of my hair, I wished there was less of it. I snapped off a knobby twig from a shrub at my heel and pulled it back into a messy bun, using the twig to pin it there. I was distracted, and only because a raven boldly cutting past drew my attention from the task of managing my hair, did I see a movement at the corner of my eye. A figure strode away from me up a leafy incline, into the light side of the daybreak. "Hi?" I called, my voice low. The retreating shape paused, only to dart deeper into the gloom. Cresting the slope, it winked out of sight. I ran after it. It seemed like the thing to do at the time. Skidding to a stop at the slope summit, I let out a surprised grunt. I could see down and far out into the forest. There was nobody down there, nothing but more trees. Fear whispered in my ear, "No humans are supposed to be outside," but I shook it off. Such a thing was surely nothing but my imagination. No demon would be this close to the temple. It would be like a human who wanted to live a long life doing a jig with their eyes closed on the edge of a cliff. Then I saw it again. The shadowed figure was there when I turned around, but was at the bottom of the slope. My feet skipped back, then there was no more floored. I remembered the same time my head moved to where my feet had been, that I'd been standing on the apex of a steep and high slope. I went down. I tumbled backward and ended up rolling and rolling. The world churned around me, but leveled out abruptly as I crashed into the base of a tree at the slope's underside. My eyes was up in the air and my shins mashed against my forehead. Oh gods, it hurt. I rocked my body until I fell onto my side, and pulled my legs back to curl them under me. I breathed in and out slowly, mentally checking myself over. Nothing felt broken. I sat up and stretched it out. No, nothing was broken. The pendant I wore around my neck pressed into my collarbone awkwardly. I fiddled with it until it hung properly, and the leather cord was no longer choking me. I stood and rubbed at my head, then tried to get my bearings. The slope was too steep to climb back up, and I wasn't much into rock climbing. Like most people, I was reasonably tolerable of heights, up to a certain point, and tolerable with deep water, up to a certain point. And even agreeable with confined spaces. Up to a certain point. Heights especially high were a stickler with me, despite my love of the things you could do when you were especially high. I had a way of pretending the floor was much closer than it truly was. Nevertheless, the slope was too high to pretend, so I was either going left or right. Determined to stay calm, I ignored the first curls of fear in my stomach. I hadn't explored this far out into the forest yet, and based on how long I had run for, I was at least 10 miles from the wall. I was not worried about the time. I could still get back for breakfast and with enough time to walk to class with Alex. Looking to the east, the sky was lightening to blue, but the sunrise was always painfully slow. Classes did not start until the sun was in the sky. I picked the straightest line through the trees as I could, and started off, my boots slapping muddy puddles riddling the way. In the early morning, the forest was empty of human presence apart from its familiar visitor and me, but it was creepy now. Like someone was watching. A short while later, it was clear I'd done something wrong. The trees were getting denser, and more closely packed together, like I was going further into the forest. I stopped and spun around. My first instinct was to go back. I was walking in a straight line, and I could go back to the slope base and start again. I had been walking in a straight line, hadn't I? Those nasty curls of fear tickled my insides again. I started to walk back, but stopped after less than half a mile. I scanned the ground. Horrified at what I did not see, I knelt down to get a better look. To my dismay, I could not see any footprints or other evidence I had passed this way. All clerics were master trackers, bested only by shifters who changed into predators like big cats. As a disciple, I had been trained in the basics of tracking, of course, and at that moment I felt the bitter sting of failure. What I should have done the moment I felt lost is literally retraced my steps and started again. But I hadn't done that. I'd let the fear get one up on me, and plunged into the forest without thinking. I needed to calm down and focus. I figured if I went high, I could see further around me. I strode back a pace, and took a running jump at a broad oak trunk. I reached the lowest branch starting 5 feet or so above my head, and dug my fingertips into the bark. Tree climbing was easy, and in no time I hauled my body over the highest bough that would hold my weight. I balanced on my toes, hands to knees. Exhaling my breath was visible plumes of wispy vapor, and for a few seconds I chugged circular globules to amuse myself. It was cold, it being the end of autumn, but the cooler days didn't bother me. It was a welcome change since my body had felt broken. I sat up and stretched it out. No, nothing was broken. I would become one of the faceless and nameless that went missing every year, to be forgotten as my body rotted or was left to become a demon dinner. I couldn't handle it, nor could my body functions manage the full-scale meltdown. My legs buckled and the world went a funny gray color. I fainted, but told myself I didn't have time to faint, and came to in the next second. Not that my actions meant anything, or my revival is what stopped my ass hitting the ground. The boy darted forward so fast his body blurred, and something hard and invisible shunted into me. So hard it knocked the breath from my lungs. Pushed off center, my legs flew up and the sky swung into view. He'd caught me. Stop talking, he said. Then smiled. I stared up at him dumbly. Was he making a joke? I hadn't said a word. In fact, I think I'd forgotten to breathe since I saw him, and that's what caused my half-fainting spell. I shifted. My top rode up some and his fingers touched my back. Something hot and powerful invaded me. It charged through my body until every muscle was tense and straining, not pleasant after the baptism of ice and fire I'd been an intimate and unwilling subject of before. And then it was gone, dissipating into nothing. I relaxed so completely it felt like my bones had unhinged, and my muscles liquefied. The boy's face was blank with shock. Had he felt the painful heat too? I hoped so, because I was sure it was his fault. There was a fracas nearby, getting closer and louder. My heart did a good job of clambering into my throat and blocking my airway. The party hunting me crashed past and kept on going. The boy, who had crouched down with me on his knee whilst I had worked on breathing right, ducked his head down and tensed. I felt better because he too was barely breathing. My heart thundered and my thoughts raced. The bloodhounds were trained to follow the weakest of trails. Why didn't they smell me when my scent would have led them right to us? This brought me round to the daunting thought of how I got so far ahead, was able to roll around on the floor, and encounter a strange boy before they had caught up. Again, who was this boy, over whose arm and knee I was draped? Not that it was uncomfortable, but he'd put his hands on me so easily, and held me close, and it felt good. The shock had me relaxing and looking down at his hands. They were big, hard, and somehow elegant as they curled around me. The hunting party passed out of sight and hearing range. My stomach unclenched, and my heart slid back down to rest uneasily in my chest. The boy remained as he was and peered into my face. My heart raced at how tall and how strong he was. Hair cut close to his head, the general impression was hardness. A heavy top brow, and sharp cheekbones rested high on a sculpted face. His nose was the opposite of the distinctive aquiline bridge most boy disciples had, and I liked it. His bold eyebrows and masculine lips added depth to a face that needed no flattering. The scent of soil and sunlight reached me as I watched his silver eyes flick from my face to the leather cord at my neck. "We've been looking for you," he said. The first words I'd spoken all day were, "Nobody looks for me, and how do you know my name?" Taken aback by the feeble quality of my own voice, I lifted my chin and added some gusto. "I mean, put me down. Now." He did no such thing, and he did not answer my question. But he did smile again, and what a spectacular show it was. His body was heavy and hot. Through the fabric of my clothes I felt the hard lines of him, and the slow thump of his heart over mine. Without thinking, I reached to touch his jaw, and it felt like strength. My fingertips glided over a raised slash of skin, and a quick tug tilted his head so I could see more of his profile. I traced a scar following the line of his jaw, curving up to his cheekbone. The skin was puckered, rough. His eyes met mine and I shrugged. The scar made him real to me. I snaked my hands up his bare, solid shoulders, and jumped off him, so I stood on my own 2 feet. I knew without a shadow of doubt this boy would rather die than hurt me, Ray, he said softly. I shivered from silky soft calling of my name, but then he finished with, my name is Brendan, and you are mine. My whole body jolted. Then my startled laugh broke the short silence. Needing space to think and breathe, I pushed away from him. In your dreams, I said, and spun around. I tried to pin down a direction to run toward. I realized at that moment my solution was downright silly and ineffective. See bad, scary, or confusing thing, turn and run from bad, scary, or confusing thing until you bump into another bad, scary, or confusing thing. I was getting nowhere fast. You wouldn't say such a thing if you knew the truth. And since I saw you first, you have to be mine. The White Witch was right, and now I'll never hear the end of it. I didn't think you would come out here so soon and so freely. I tried to ignore you, even when you got lost, but when I heard you running away from them I had to help. They would have caught you. I'd stopped moving in the middle of this rationalization. His voice was awfully attractive. I could never describe how it sounded because it would only ever sound perfect to me, and no one else. Once I'd gotten past hearing the words, I thought over the meaning. In delayed reaction, my chest puffed out and I bristled. The hell I do. People don't belong to one another, and I certainly do not belong to you, even if you did see me first, whatever that means. What stupid dash. He moved closer, then I could see nothing but his eyes again. Mouth suddenly dry. I was unable to finish my scathing rebuttal, and it took a moment to unstick my tongue from the roof of my mouth. A warm rolling sensation formed in the pit of my stomach and lodged there. It was an odd sensation, it even hurt a little, but it was a nice pain. I breathed in deeply through my nose and expelled the breath through my mouth. The whole deep breathing thing was helping feeble quality of my own voice. I lifted my chin and added some gusto. I mean, put me down. Now. He did no such thing, and he did not answer my question. But he did smile again, and what a spectacular show it was. His body was heavy and hot. Through the fabric of my clothes I felt the hard lines of him, and the slow thump of his heart over mine. Without thinking, I reached to touch his jaw, and it felt like strength. My fingertips glided over a raised slash of skin, and a quick tug tilted his head so I could see more of his profile. I traced a scar following the line of his jaw, curving up to his cheekbone. The skin was puckered, rough. His eyes met mine and I shrugged. The scar made him real to me. I snaked my hands up his bare, solid shoulders and jumped off him, so I stood on my own 2 feet. I knew without a shadow of doubt this boy would rather die than hurt me, Ray, he said softly. I shivered from silky soft calling of my name, but then he finished with, my name is Brendan, and you are mine. My whole body jolted. Then my startled laugh broke the short silence. Needing space to think and breathe, I pushed away from him. In your dreams, I said, and spun around. I tried to pin down a direction to run toward. I realized at that moment my solution was downright silly and ineffective. See bad, scary, or confusing thing, turn and run from bad, scary, or confusing thing until you bump into another bad, scary, or confusing thing. I was getting nowhere fast. You wouldn't say such a thing if you knew the truth. And since I saw you first, you have to be mine. The White Witch was right, and now I'll never hear the end of it. I didn't think you would come out here so soon and so freely. I tried to ignore you, even when you got lost, but when I heard you running away from them I had to help. They would have caught you. I'd stopped moving in the middle of this rationalization. His voice was awfully attractive. I could never describe how it sounded because it would only ever sound perfect to me, and no one else. Once I'd gotten past hearing the words I thought over the meaning. In delayed reaction my chest puffed out and I bristled. The hell I do. People don't belong to one another, and I certainly do not belong to you, even if you did see me first, whatever that means. What stupid dash. He moved closer, then I could see nothing but his eyes again. Mouth suddenly dry. I was unable to finish my scathing rebuttal, and it took a moment to unstick my tongue from the roof of my mouth. A warm rolling sensation formed in the pit of my stomach and lodged there. It was an odd sensation, it even hurt a little, but it was a nice pain. I breathed in deeply through my nose and expelled the breath through my mouth. The whole deep breathing thing was helping. Okay then, Brendan, I said serenely, but my heart thumped too hard and he cocked his head as if he could hear it. I went on nonetheless, what do you want? Why are you in the forest, alone? The best defense is a good offense, and I could give as good as I got. This is demon territory, you know. I can admit I was freaked and a bit off course. He snorted a laugh and my temper bloated into righteous indignation. It's dark out here. I was running away from the clerics because they had dogs. My eyes darted to and from his now, uncomfortable with the lie. And I don't like dogs. They bark. Loudly. And how do you know my name? There was a beat of silence as his eyes held mine. You will have to get out of the habit of lying. You won't be able to do that for much longer. And anyway, you don't have to explain anything to me. I understand. I know you, and that is why we have come for you. Are you from the slums? For a bad moment there I had assumed he was from the sect. I would be in a world trouble if anyone saw me out here. I was beyond the wall, which was forbidden, and I had seen. I didn't want to think about the horror I'd seen, and how I'd been foolish enough to get caught seeing the thing I saw. I had disobeyed a direct order from a cleric, something I, a disciple training to be a cleric, should never do. No, I was not so sure anymore. If Brendan was from the sect, he'd have called to the clerics, not hidden me from them. If he was a civilian, I didn't see how he could come to be lost outside. After all, you would have to get past the wall to make it out here. There was not a human alive that didn't understand the dangers of going over the wall and into demon territory. I felt stupid then. If there was not a human alive who didn't know how dangerous it was outside, what the hell was I doing outside? I was going to have very serious words with myself. Coming for you is not something I chose, and believe me, if I could change it I would. He paused and shook his head. We are stuck. You belong to me, he repeated. And I to you. Now we have touched, it is sealed. All right? Sealed my ass. I decided then and there, I did not like this boy. You cannot appear next to me in the middle of demon territory and say such silly things, I said, strained. You're beginning to scare me. That was another lie. I was beyond sacred now. My body couldn't keep up a constant pitch of terror, so it had simply gone beyond terror and pressed a big reset button. I was too afraid outside to be anything but calm inside. Voice unattractively shrill, I lowered my clenched fist and took a deep breath. I moderated my voice, let's start with where you're from. He sighed and scrubbed a hand over his head. A place not too far from here. You are very lost. I shifted on the spot. Are you transferring to this region to be a disciple? It happened. Rarely, for it was too hazardous to travel large distances through demon territory, and it was only attempted once a settlement had reached a population density that put all the humans there in danger. But it did happen. He shook his head. Are you visiting cleric at the temple? I was reaching, but that could explain how he could be so comfortable in the forest. Clerics were not like regular people and often came from hardy families. The clerics were the fastest, strongest, most intelligent and intuitive of humankind. That is why they managed to keep us so safe. His face darkened. No, the word was fired at me like a bullet. Without preparing myself for the answer, I asked with catty aplomb, are you a demon then? Oh yes, he said softly.